Hi everyone, welcome to webinar number 4. In this webinar we're going to work on a rather difficult bar chart question that I found on the internet, and I looked at a website and I noticed that there were a lot of answers that were written for this, but the answers were, almost all of them were not really great, and they could get 7, probably. Some of them couldn't even get 7, so I decided to write one for this. So let's just go paragraph by paragraph, but first let's take a look at the question itself. I'm just gonna zoom it here a little bit so that we can talk about it. So this is employment rate by country in 2 years, 1995-2005. And the countries are Australia, Switzerland, Iceland, the UK, and New Zealand, and the US. One reason that makes it complicated is that, first of all, we have males and females, and then we have 1995 and 2005. We have males in 1995, that's blue, and then males in 2005, that's red, and then females in 1995, that's green, and females in 2005, that's purple.
Generally, unemployment has increased from 1995 to 2005 across both texts.
Yes, very good. Yes, that's one thing, and that's an important thing to notice. Employment has increased, unemployment has decreased. From 1995 to 2005, it doesn't matter among females and males. In both genders, you can see that employment has increased. So you see the blue compared to the red, that's males, and green with purple, that's females. And you can see that in both and in all countries and in both years, consistently, without exception, employment has increased. That's one key feature. What else?
Employment in females is generally lower than males.
Yes, that's another one. Employment females is generally lower. That's a second key feature. What is a third and a fourth? Overall, you can see that Iceland has the highest percentage for men, which is the highest percentage overall. And who is the lowest?
UK females 1995.
No, UK,
Sorry.
New Zealand, yeah. New Zealand in 1995. But here it's Iceland in 2005.
In the chart, it shows a percentage, but the topic of the bar chart says employment rates.
Yeah.
So when you say rates, what does it mean?
Rate is basically the speed with which something increases. That's the technical term. However, sometimes in general terms, people use rate to refer to numbers or percentages. It's not technically correct to say rate for percentage, but people do it. Let's start with our introduction. So let's keep the introduction short because this is going to be a lot of information, therefore it's going to be a large essay, and we are trying to stay around 200 maybe, okay, but it would be difficult because there are a lot of numbers to report, so it might be difficult to stay at below 200, but we'll see. The present bar chart provides data on the percentage of men and women who were employed in 6 different countries in 1995 and 2005. So one thing that is important, two things that are important. First of all, let's take a look at this comma here. This comma, we have to decide whether it's restrictive or non-restrictive. So do we need it or not? And we have to look at this adjective clause. Okay, so if you take a look at that adjective clause, you will see that the present bar chart provides data on the percentage of men and women. But what kind of men and women? men and women who were employed, not any men and women. So this becomes necessary information because we need to restrict not all men and women, only employed men and women. So this becomes restrictive, so no comma. And then another point about the introduction is you can't really say from 1995 to 2005 or between 1995 and 2005. You can't say any of those because you do not have data of what happens between 1995 and 2005. You only have data about 1995 and about 2005, but for example, in 2000, you don't know what was going on. In 2001, in 1998, none of those years. So you can't say 1995 to 2005, so pay attention to that. That would be our introduction. We should keep it short because it is going to be a large essay because of all of the information here. Let me write the overview, and as you know, our structure is going to be an introduction, which we wrote, and then now we are going to move to our overview statement. Okay, overview statement, we usually start with overall. So we talked about the key features, so we are going to mention the key features, and as you know, in the overview, you're not supposed to report any numbers because we're talking about general trends and key features, so that's not a good place to report numbers. In all 6 countries, men, let's make it a little bit more general. Men enjoyed comparatively higher employment, so that is one key feature. Furthermore, the percentage of jobs for men and women was consistently higher in 2005, in which the highest rate of employment was recorded among males in Iceland. Okay, so that's the other one. Let's add as opposed to the lowest accounted for by females in New Zealand in 1995. So let me just bring this back here just for a moment because I want to talk about the 2 paragraphs. Okay, so now what we did was we basically wrote our introduction and our overview, and now we're going to write 2 paragraphs. So we need to divide this information into 2 paragraphs. The problem is that when you divide the information into 2 paragraphs, you always have to think strategically about what is going to allow you to compare and contrast better and more. What is going to give you the opportunity to do that? So, for example, if here you talk about males in one paragraph and females in the other paragraph, that will give you an opportunity to compare the years, but it will take away the opportunity from you to compare the genders. If you talk about 1995 in one paragraph and 2005 in another paragraph, that will take away the opportunity to talk about the genders, but it will give you the opportunity to compare the years. But a third way, which will give you the opportunity to do both, compare the genders and compare the years, is if you divide the countries into two groups, so you go with Australia, Switzerland, and Iceland, and on the one hand, and you go with UK, New Zealand, and the USA on the other. Another reason to put the UK, New Zealand, and the USA together is because the number of males in 2005 in all of those countries, in all three, is relatively the same, almost the same, very, very similar. In the UK it's a bit higher, maybe 1% higher, but it's very similar. So that makes sense to do that. So based on that information, okay, what I'm going to do is I am going to divide the countries into two sets, and for each set we are going to compare both genders and years. Okay, so as I have always said, for this part it is very important that you focus on creating clear topic sentences. So Australia, Switzerland, and Iceland, those were the countries that we mentioned that we're going to talk about in the first paragraph. Let's say recorded. So what is it that we can say that is the general trend about them is that the employment for males was generally higher than females, which is what we already talked about in the topic sentence. So, sorry, not in the topic sentence, in the overall statement. Because we talked about that in the overall statement, here we just need to mention it in brief. Okay, relatively higher male employment, and let's say fluctuating figures for females. Now we get into the data, like we get into the nitty-gritty of it. So let's look at the numbers here. For the numbers, as you can see, in Australia we have about 55% for men, and it goes up to about 69, but we're not going to call it 69, we'll probably call it just below 70. And then for men again in Switzerland, it starts at around 65, goes up to about maybe 78. And then here in Iceland, it starts at about 70, goes up to about 83 or so. Okay, so we're going to mention all of those. Let's start by saying employment among, and now because I want to paraphrase, instead of men in Australia, I'll say Australian men. Okay, went from about 55, and I have to say about 55 because it is not exact numbers, so you always have to use approximate language. And instead of 1995, you can just say 95 like this with an apostrophe. That means 1995. To just below 70 in 2005, while in Switzerland, so I'm trying to create longer sentences, complex structure, and Iceland, just to save space, let's put those two together. The figures, let's see here, we see that in Switzerland and Iceland, we went from 65 to more than 75, and here we went from 70 to more than 80, so those are more than 10% increases. So the figures rose more than 10 points. If you don't want to say percent or percentages, you can just say points. That's correct. From 65% and 70 to about 78 and 83%. And this 83%, if you remember, is this one here. This is the all-time high. So I will just make it a positive here. Okay. An all-time high, and that's a compound adjective. That's why it has a hyphen. As for female employment, so here I'm moving on to females, right, to women. Here female employment was always lagging behind, right? So we can just say that as an adjective clause. Okay, and this is an introductory element. So as for employment, if you're familiar with it, which lag behind, and now we continue our main clause. Australian women were largely unemployed. So you see here, instead of talking about employment, I'm talking about unemployment, because most of them are unemployed, right? So that's just things that you can do to create more variety, to make it more interesting. With a mere, and mere here, it means only, right? 27% employment rate. And this 27% employment rate is one of the lowest, but it's not the lowest. The lowest all-time low is in New Zealand, right? So we can't really say that this was the all-time low. Jumping to 40 in 2005. Swiss and Icelandic women fared better in comparison, with 55% to 78% and 41% to 52%, approximate increases in employment. And now we have to adjust with, let's put the respectively here. Or we can actually make it an adjective and make it a coordinate adjective, like that. And as you know, coordinate adjectives take comma. So that would be my first body paragraph. All right, this is the first body paragraph. We talked about these three countries: Australia, Switzerland, Iceland. Now I'm going to move to UK, New Zealand, USA. Pay attention that here you can't really say UK, you have to say the UK when you put it in a sentence. USA works, but the US is what is more common, and New Zealand. And then the UK becomes British when you talk about nationality, the same way that Switzerland becomes Swiss, and New Zealand becomes New Zealander, and USA becomes American. In comparison, I just put this here for my coherence, so that there is a vertical relationship between the two paragraphs. In the UK, you can see how I put an article there. The US and New Zealand, and of course do not forget to capitalize these. These are names of countries. This is an introductory element, so it needs another comma. The proportions were similar. Same thing, men had more employment, not prepositions, proportions. There we go. Were similar with lower percentages. Okay? Because as you can see here, if you compare Australia, Switzerland, Iceland, you can see that the percentages were higher. But here you can see that the percentages are lower, but the proportions are the same. And women, it's fluctuating for women, right? Maybe we should add that there. Now, in all three, now when I say in all three, I'm referring to in all three countries, so I don't have to repeat. And that's the kind of cohesion that will get you band score 9. A band score 9 cohesion is a kind of cohesion that does not attract attention. Okay? Male employment was between 55 and 60. Let's make this a complex sentence. Was between 55 and 60, which equalized. Now, as you can see, what I'm talking about here is, you can see here that, look at the blue bar. The blue bar for the UK is 55, for New Zealand is 60, and for the USA is about 69. So they're all between 55 and 60. Okay, so that's what I mean by that. Male employment was between 55 and 60 in, let's put in 1995 here. Male employment was between 50 and 60, which equalized. But when I'm talking about equalized, I mean I'm talking about the three red bars, which are almost exactly the same. Okay, so I'm talking about that, which equalized in 2005 at around, what is that percentage? Around 70%, let's say. Okay. Now here, because I talked about 2005, I can delete this actually. Just saving words here. And I can change this to by to show that that was 1995, this is 2005. That by will show that continuity. Instead of in, I made it by, which shows progression of time at around 70%. Okay, now here too, when I say here too, it means I'm comparing these percentages and these numbers with the previous paragraph. So that's another very good way to create cohesion. Women struggled to find work, and you see here, instead of employment and all of that, or jobs, I used work, which can be used in this way. And instead of lag behind, I said struggled, right? And then exemplified by an all-time low of 25% among female New Zealanders in 1995. Okay, so I'm talking about this number here. You can see that here, this number is the all-time low. So that's what I talked about here. Women struggle to find work, exemplified, and you can see this is a phrase, by an all-time low, and this is a compound adjective, that's why it has the hyphen, of 25% among female New Zealanders in 1995, and that's the nationality. We use ER to create nationality out of New Zealand. Okay, in 1995, last sentence, in 2005, the numbers improved considerably. Let's report these numbers for women. 2005 for women. This number, purple, and purple. This one is about 60, above 60, above 40, and again above 60, right? To just above 60 for British and American women, and above 40 for New Zealander females. Yeah. So that would be our full essay. So this is about 250 words, right? Which is not bad. So minimum for task 1 is 150, and we capped it at 250. We reported most of the numbers. We have a good overall. So I would probably say this can easily get above 8, maybe even 9. It's close to getting a 9, right? And I will clean it up as always and put it on the website. You can take a look at it there. All right. So any questions?